Good morning, everybody. We'll just get started in a moment. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our first webinar of the year, our first event of the year. So really looking forward to this and to the many other events that we've got coming up. So today we're talking about, is your non-for-profit prepared for the year ahead? Definitely a big question, and looking at some of the trends and challenges for 2023. So just to go through some webinar etiquette before we start, just to say the session is being recorded and that it will be available on demand on the Hart Square website afterwards. So please feel free to share with your colleagues or have as a useful resource. There is a Q&A box that you'll see. That's for any questions that you have throughout the session. We want this to be as useful as possible for you. So please do put them in, and we will try and cover off as many of them as we can throughout the session. And then you'll also see there's a chat box, and that's really for any more technical support questions or general questions. And my lovely colleague Rebecca is in the background, and she will be keeping an eye out for them. So I want to introduce our speakers for today. So I am Joyce Harman. I'm Senior Client Relationship Manager at Hart Square, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by two of my colleagues this morning, who I'm very grateful to take some time out of their busy schedule. So Helen, if you could introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Joyce. Good morning, everyone. My name is Helen McGrath, and I'm a Senior Business Change Consultant at Hart Square.
Perfect, thank you. And Chris.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Gilbert, and I'm Head of Technology and Services at Hart Square.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'm going to just, for those of you who are not aware of Hart Square, just to say that we are a consultancy practice, an independent consultancy practice, and we work only in the not-for-profit space. So I'm going to run a quick poll, so if you bear with me while I bring this up. And really just this is to give us an idea of, who's with us this morning and what are some of the sort of the challenges or priorities that you're thinking about for this year, that what you're sort of focusing on. So it could be things like you're trying to put together, your strategic plan, looking at resourcing for the year, not only for projects, but in general. You might be looking to review your technology, seeing, what changes you need to make there. Or, is it fit for purpose? It could be on the people side of thing, looking at the resources, changes to staffing, skills within the team, or it could be things like funding. As we all know, is always a big challenge, and the impact of the cost of living crisis. So interesting coming in on that. So let me just end that poll, and I will share the results. So very interesting. I suppose good to see that a lot of people are thinking about people. The people side of things, and Helen's definitely going to be talking a lot more about that later, but that's 50% of sort of people around that. And then definitely closely followed by, funding and the cost of living crisis. But it's not to say the other areas are not as important, quite a high percentage around strategic planning and around technology. So thank you for that. That's really quite interesting. So hopefully some of that matches with the context of some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So I wanted to put this slide up in relation to put some context around, why are the three of us here today talking about trends and challenges and things that we're seeing, to show that there is some thinking behind it. So, as Hart Square, we've been working with over 256 clients to be exact, all from the not-for-profit space, ranging, from membership bodies, charities, trade unions, lots of different types of organisations. And over 538 actual projects that we've all been involved in. I should obviously point out that it's not that Helen, Chris and I have delivered all of these 538 projects, as that would make us the busiest people in the world. But obviously we have been involved in those. And that's really why bringing forward some of the things that we see on those projects and that we're seeing continuing into this year. So thinking about, challenges, from last year and that we're seeing continuing on into this year, this is by no means all of them at all, but it's really just some of the kind of key areas that we see and that we can talk about in a bit more detail. But one of the points I should also say is with some of the areas here covered today, because there's so much to talk about and we're really just talking at a very high level this morning, we are running a number of other sessions much more focused on some of these topics throughout the year. So you'll see them over the next while. But looking at things like digital skills, it really, is something that's become up an awful lot more and is definitely continuing on to this year, about making sure that you have the right people in the right roles. If you're talking about a project, not embarking on a project and simply assigning people roles and not having thought about whether they'll be able to do it or not, which also has an impact when you're thinking about, the resourcing and having the right resources in place. There is an awful lot of focus that people think about the technology side of things, but they forget about the people side of things. Because if you only focus on the technology, you're not bringing people along with you. And also then around technology, the technology marketplace, to be honest, it's a bit of a minefield. And I know Chris is going to be talking about this in a bit more detail, but there's been a lot of changes within the technology marketplace with regard to the technology partners and, some mergers and acquisitions, but equally some of the challenges around that. External factors, we all know, the cost of living crisis, funding. I do know a lot of clients I was working with last year that, getting funding is not a new thing, but that a lot of organizations either got less funding than they had hoped for, or in some cases they didn't get the funding that they had put forward. So the funding marketplace has definitely got an awful lot more competitive. Now, that's not to be scaremongering. There is still funding out there and people are still, actively funding various different projects, but it is becoming much, much more competitive. And definitely that's a theme that we are seeing continuing on into this year. And then thinking about, user needs and people thinking about what people actually need, not going off and doing projects that are all about wish lists and then you can't deliver them and then people get very disheartened. So by no means this is everything, it definitely isn't, because it'd be great if we could say these are the only challenges that they are. This is just some of the high level ones. But really for the focus of today, we've broken this down into three main themes, three main areas, and they are people, technology and strategy. So we're going to go into those in a bit more detail. I'm really keen to be bringing in Chris and Helen as soon as possible. So I'm just going to run through these on a very, very high level because, Chris and Helen can give us some really, really good insights. So thinking about people, you can really look at this again in breaking it down into three areas of skills, engagement, and looking at socioeconomic factors. So looking at the skills, thinking about what skills have you got? Where are there skills gaps? And when you're thinking about projects, whatever those projects may be, technology or not, thinking about who are going to have the various roles and responsibilities and have they got the right skills to do that? Very often what we see is where projects can go a bit awry is where people have been given a role to do and they really struggle with it. And then that has a knock-on effect on the project, but also on that person as well. You need to think about the impact of putting certain responsibilities on people. So thinking about the skills is really, really important. Your staff are, the key to driving change on any of the projects or any work that you're doing as an organization. Technology, is important, but it's not the only element of change. It's really all about engagement. Thinking about culture and change management, having the right culture and people being bought into it, that's going to lead to better adoption on any project, be it technology or not. Interestingly, around change management, definitely up to say 2 years ago, if you ever mentioned change management, you kind of got a bit of a glazed response from people. It was kind of a, oh yes, nice, but kind of not a priority for us. Definitely, and I would say particularly more towards the second half of last year, a lot more technology partners, but also clients working on projects are actually having conversations around who is going to be the change lead on this project? How are we going to manage change? We need to put together a communications plan, because thinking about what people actually need, how that change is going to happen. So definitely seeing that still continuing on projects this year, and something really important, but really encouraging that change management is now being seen as something that needs to be taken seriously, I suppose. Socioeconomic factors, we all know the pressures that are on all of us, personally and organizationally. Looking at things like recruitment, it's really tough market out there at the minute. There's higher expectations around salaries, which is an impact as well of the cost of living crisis. But in general, there is a pressure, to do more with less. So, these all have factors on people and thinking about their jobs and how they do their jobs and the pressures that they're under. Thinking about technology, and I say Chris will talk about this in a lot more detail, but there's been an awful lot of mergers and acquisitions in the marketplace, so therefore kind of limiting down the number of possible options that are out there. And again, the skills and capacities challenge, particularly around recruitment also for the technology partners, is definitely something that we've seen last year, and unfortunately it doesn't look like it's gone away and will continue into this year. But thinking about the systems and tools, streamlining and bringing in better staff efficiencies, that's always been a driver for any organisation. But definitely we found over the last year with the other socioeconomic factors and external factors, a lot of projects are starting off when they're talking about their strategy that one of the key drivers is better efficiencies. And finally, moving away from those older legacy systems and moving to the cloud, because there are still a number of organizations that are, still on old on-premise systems, and then that brings up security considerations, but also efficiencies. So definitely a lot more conversations around the driver to use technology to help with some of those external factors that are there. But also thinking of systems and tools, hybrid working, it's here to stay, and making sure that everybody's got everything they need in place to be able to continue with that. And then thinking of new areas. Now, these are not by any means new areas in the sense of community platforms, learning management systems, LMSs. Have been around for a long time, but new in the sense of definitely over the last year, and a lot of this has been driven by COVID, where everybody had to move to online working. And therefore, there is now an expectation of how people interact with people. And so we've seen over the last sort of year, and definitely conversations already this year, about people talking a lot more about community platforms and learning management systems, looking at different ways of interacting, with their key stakeholders. And then finally, on strategy, I'm not going to talk about the external factors again, but thinking about the strategic planning. And I know that definitely, Helen's got lots of sort of thoughts around this, and particularly around resourcing and people. But having a very clear, documented strategy, and one that, kind of stands up to scrutiny and makes sense, and that people have been bought into, having realistic expectations of what you can do, what is achievable, not trying to do too many things at once, which really leads on to the point about strategic drift. And this is really when you have a strategy in place, but it no longer fits with the external environment. So, not to be always bringing up COVID, but COVID was a perfect example of this, where if you as an organization, part of your strategy was that everything you were doing was in person, you had put in a certain number of events that were going to generate revenue, and all of that stopped. So therefore your strategic plan had to change. It was no longer fit for purpose because the environment had changed. So it's about reviewing your strategy to make sure there is no strategic drift, that it still stands up to scrutiny, that you can still deliver it against it, or actually do you need to make some significant changes to adapt to that way. And then planning for the future, definitely, and it's always something that we would always recommend anyway, is doing that review of your IT landscape, not being afraid to say, just because something's been in for a very, very long time, it doesn't mean you have to change it, but sometimes it's worth saying, is this best serving its purpose? Is this giving the efficiencies that we need? So reviewing those systems, reviewing, what they're doing, are they helping you? Is there changes that are need to be made to them? Or is it actually we just need to make some changes to the processes and the way that we're doing things? And obviously resourcing, we could talk about resourcing all day long, thinking about all the projects that you have coming up over the year. Doesn't matter, they don't have to all be technology projects. What are all the projects that you're planning on doing? Thinking about the resourcing, the implications of running, multiple projects at the same time. How is that resourcing going to work? And also thinking about where they are technology projects, where they could be interlinked, so that you end up not having to go back and do rework, and then therefore can bring additional costs to those projects. So enough from me. So I want to bring in Chris and Helen now, because they're the guys with all the knowledge. So Helen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, thanks, Joyce. Yes, so At Hart Square, I'm currently working on a couple of CRM implementation projects and also a business case. And in both of those, or three of those projects rather, I'm operating there in a project manager consultant capacity. And I'm also working as a project sponsor on a CRM implementation and also CRM partner selection. Prior to Hart Square, I worked in the charity sector, most recently at RNIB, the Royal National Institute of Blind People. And my background is strategic marketing and communications, and that was the role I had there. And as part of that role, I also worked on the CRM program and also on change communications for charity mergers, of which there was quite a few when I was there at RNIB.
Perfect, thanks, Helen. And Chris, same question for you.
Yeah, so I suppose I have a similar sort of pathway into Hart Square as Helen. I worked for a number of charities of kind of varying sizes. I worked for the National Trust, British Heart Foundation and Arthritis Care, which is now Versus Arthritis, and was with them across about a 10-year period. And that was kind of my introduction to the charity space. I was supporter services manager, membership manager, CRM manager, once in wearing all three of those hats at one place, which was interesting. And then moved into Hart Square and have been through a range of roles really with our company. Head of Technology and Services is really where sort of this is all culminated, I guess, in terms of my experience. So I work across many of the same projects as Helen does in various capacities. So in a sponsor role, my colleague Reese, who has the same role as I do, we have inputs into a variety of different projects, as well as run our own as well through the year. So we have a lot of different relationships with the technology providers, clients, and with our team as well.
Fantastic, thank you. So, as you can see, with those many years of experience, it makes perfect sense to bring you guys in this morning. So, the three of us have had lots of discussions around this topic, and I know it's one of those things that we could always talk about all day long. So I'm really keen to sort of explore your thoughts, based on both your experiences. So Helen, looking at the people element first, what would you say are the biggest challenges or themes, that you've seen over the last year that you think are likely to continue into this year?
Yes, I think the number one challenge at the moment is staff retention. It's a very competitive market right now, and we're seeing the impact of that across clients and the technology partners. And so it can mean that there's a bit of a churn at times, which has an impact on the project, because you're losing people and then you're getting new people, and you have to bring them up to speed. So that can that certainly can impact a timeline there. And then of course it's great having new people coming into an organization, coming into a project. We want their skills, we need new blood. But one of the challenges of having new people on board is they can upset the apple cart. They're coming in, they've got great ideas, and they can challenge the old ways of working. But they can also change the direction of a project. Perhaps they might want to bring something new to the project, bring new requirements on, and that can result in a change of scope. So again, you're impacting the project, impacting the timeline, impacting the scope and ways of working. So there's a lot to consider there when you have people coming and going as such on projects. And I guess the other key element to think of is remote working. And we're doing this mixture now, aren't we? Most of us are doing a combination of some remote working, some face-to-face working. And it's bringing that together and how to manage that, particularly if we're having workshops where ideally you need everybody in the same space to pull ideas together. And training is another area as well where it is far better user experience for everybody to be in the room to deliver that training. So you're always trying to think of those factors. How do you get everybody together so that they have the best experience?
Perfect, thanks, Helen. Just one point on that, just thinking about that training, and I agree with you about the face-to-face. Do you have a view, because I know sometimes we're often asked to do hybrid training, as in some on site, some on Zoom or Teams. Do you kind of see that as a challenge, or it can work or not? Just interested in kind of your thoughts on that, because I know we do get asked that quite a bit.
Yeah, I personally not a fan of that. So I've always, obviously, when we were in lockdown, we had to do remote training, and so we had no choice. We got on with that. But as soon as we've been able to, be free of the restrictions, I have been really encouraging clients to come in face to face. Even if there's extra travel time, extra costs involved, just because it is so far much more beneficial to get everybody in the room. And so, no, I'm not encouraging a hybrid training, because it's too difficult for everybody to do that. So I would only do that if it was the only way possible. But I'm really, really pushing hard to bring that in. I mean, making sure the sponsors involved in that to try and push that message home.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, that just, yeah, interesting talk. Because I say we do get asked it quite a lot. So Chris, kind of thinking about people and kind of Helen's comments, is there anything, are you seeing anything different? Or what would be the key areas for you?
For me, it's almost sort of offshoots of some of the things that Helen had pointed to. I think one of the things that Helen and I have definitely seen on projects where we work together, but also I think seeing them across the sector with other people that I know at other organisations, is that there seems to be, with recruitment now, I suppose more of a leaning towards contracted recruitment. So rather than bringing people on permanent roles, and that, that's for a number of probably very good reasons to consider, how long you think, you need that role for, or whether you're even convinced it's the right role. But what that is proving to be very challenging in the areas where you need then to utilize those people for projects, because then suddenly you've got not only a project timeline, you've got a contractor's timeline to try and factor in. And we've had projects where people's contracts have ended before the project is completed, which means then how do you train all of your new users when your trainer's going to finish 3 months before your project is to go live, and all of the challenges really around just trying to make sure that people aren't, as they rightly would be, looking at the tail end of a contract as to the next role. And we're not the luxury of being, particularly now, in a kind of a stable financial situation where you might say, oh, okay, I'll sort of float around looking for something new for a couple of months before I go to my next job. So it's kind of a pinch point, I think, for a lot of organizations that we're seeing, and it's another factor to try and weigh in then when you're thinking about projects and how you're going to make a success of them, really. So that's kind of one of the main things, I think, for me, that I'm seeing more often than anything else currently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thinking on the technology side of things, Chris, we know the marketplace can be a bit of a minefield. Are there any, sort of, what are the key trends that you're sort of seeing at the moment, particularly in your, in your role as head of technology and services?
I think, as your slides, I think, pointed to, there are certainly providers that are going out to purchase the kind of other specialist solutions. So I think we see a lot of this happening on the digital kind of website agency side of things. That there are a few large companies that are then picking up specialists, and either having then a more kind of diverse portfolio, so they can provide different solutions to different sectors or through different technologies, or you have providers or companies who are buying up the same technology providers, and kind of trying to build singular solutions for them. So they're trying to kind of consolidate all of those into one. And that's not all of them by any means, but I think what's happening there is it's throwing some challenges into projects that are ongoing with existing clients, where that's a model that's being moved to, because obviously there's uncertainty and there needs to be an understanding of where does that leave you as an existing client, where does that leave you potentially as a client that's not finished their implementation, and also then for distinguishing between those different providers and really what's your methodology, what's your experience. If in some ways it's a lot cleaner to have lots of individualized providers and being able to say, okay, this is their approach, this is what they do. You simply can't have that with a singular solution. You couldn't have a menu of, oh, do you want to run your project in this way, and then pick and choose and have project managers capable of delivering those to a high standard. So those things are going to have to be brought in line, and it's whether you are going to, I suppose, go through the pain of that with those providers when you're doing a project with them, or whether it's clear enough for you to make a distinction between them when you're going out to market and trying to find, you know, who you want to work with, and kind of say, okay, have you got a proven pathway to a successful project? And really just trying to unpick all of that is becoming complicated. I think the other thing is, because of the majority of projects, I think, now have large components, or in some cases, you know, entirely driven by remote delivery. Tech partners, I think, have a greater expectation on the client and what their skill set is and who they have working there. There's fewer opportunities, I suppose, to work those things out face to face if you're not doing a project like that. So it's very much, you've got a task, you've got a series of activities assigned to you. You drop off your call, your Teams or your Zoom call, it's expected of you to go away and do those things. And unless you shout for help, the only thing you're going to know about whether that's been successful or not is whether then something's been completed in time or it hasn't. And so I think that is proving to be more of a challenge, but it's an area where tech partners rightly don't want to risk their own reputation on a project by saying, okay, we'll kind of take on all the risk ourselves, when we really have no visibility once, you know, people sort of step away from those meetings, and then it's down to people doing what they're kind of in line for the project to be able to deliver.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. You know, well, it's all really interesting points, but particularly around the skills bit and client skills bit and expectations on the technology partner. Because you say, you know, you hang up on a Zoom call, you don't have those little, you know, off the record chats that you would have if you were in a meeting room, and understanding, did people really understand what was agreed in that meeting, the things that they're now going to have to go away and do. And it is definitely a challenge. And you say, where does the risk live, and who has the risk appetite to accept that risk? So I think that's really interesting. You know, so we know that you know, the marketplace has definitely, you know, it's become very, very competitive for, you know, technically skilled people, and, you know, for project managers. So Chris, are you seeing that having an impact on projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the last year, actually, I would have said was pretty bad. That's probably one of the worst periods I think I've seen, with the amount of churn from both client side and tech partner side. I think the number of people who, I mean, we started a project recently. We were introduced to a tech partners, a project manager who then said, "Oh, I've resigned today. I'm going to be going in 3 weeks," and then, you know, that's kind of your project restarts all over again, because that's not a viable way to start a project. So I think the LinkedIn kind of spamming, hopefully nobody's on LinkedIn on this at the moment, but, you know, I get an endless churn of communications from various, you know, sponsored people on LinkedIn who are recruiting for things. And actually, I think that is, for a lot of organizations, if people aren't happy or they feel that they've been put into positions that maybe don't meet their expectations for whatever reason, those kind of carrots are constantly being dangled. And equally, on the flip side of that, I think we've actually had some discussions with people where they feel that they've been recruited into roles. You know, it's more that, and that might be because a recruitment agent doesn't understand what's required and has a conversation and kind of sells them something, and then when they get into the project after a couple of months, so this isn't what I want, and they leave. And that disruption, that kind of, that sense of, we know at the beginning of a project or a piece of work what we want and what we need from people, we think we've got the right people, and then suddenly they start dropping off, or, as I said, you know, if they're contracted, you know, for the project or prior to the project starting, that then comes in and is a factor. So it's plate spinning a lot of the time, and I think it also comes down to being very explicit and clear about what you need for your project, and being able to communicate that. Because I think we, you know, Helen and I probably could think of a number of different situations where recruitment has happened within on a client side for a particular role, and it's definitely not the role that was highlighted was needed, and the skill set, and you're sort of, everything's falling out the back of that decision, and unfortunately, you know, they don't end well. So those same issues are going to be faced by the tech partners. Hugely competitive market. I think I heard on the news yesterday that Microsoft are laying off thousands of staff as well. So there'll be another swirl of people in the market and then opportunities opening up elsewhere. So it has been hugely competitive, and I think will continue to do so for, I think, probably the next year until things hopefully start to settle a little bit. But yeah, it's not going to be any less complicated, I think, to navigate through.
Yeah, definitely. Helen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Chris is saying there. You mentioned Microsoft there, Chris. Also, Salesforce has made some redundancies there, didn't they? I think that was last week as well. So there's a lot of change going on. Definitely, it's here to stay for a while. And it is all about that disruption. And so it's really important to, hold on to your staff as much as possible. And then when you're recruiting, just take extra care to make sure it's the right person. Can you see them doing that role? Can you see them interacting with all your stakeholders, with all your external partners? Because it's important to get it right, because if you don't, as Chris said, disruption, that's definitely the key word, and it's really important to try and avoid that as much as possible in order to keep projects on track.
Yeah, definitely. And just picking up on one point, talking about that recruitment, one of the things we often get asked about is job descriptions. And one of the things for me is often they are so vague and they don't really highlight exactly what the role is, kind of picking up on some of your points, Chris. How important do you think it is to really focus on the skills that are required for that role and making it clear in the job description? Or do you think kind of vague is okay and then you sort it out during the interview process? I'd just be interested in kind of both your thoughts on it. I don't know if Helen or Chris either, if you want to come in on that, just kind of your thinking on it.
Yeah, I'll go first. No, you spend a lot of time getting your job description right, thinking about the soft skills. We all know that stakeholder engagement, communications, just dealing with people. We are a people business, and I think a lot of charities are as well. So it's important to get those skills right. So invest the time in working on that job description, making sure it works, and then it will make the interview process easier. And I know, Joyce, you do feed into a lot of job descriptions at times, don't you? Times to when clients want that support around getting someone to look after CRMs, for example, after post go live.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I'm honest, and this may sound overly harsh, I think unfortunately a lot of the job descriptions are written by people that don't understand the job, and haven't asked the right questions of the people that are asking for those roles to be filled, and sort of throw the cast the net out, and then you'll get somebody, but whether there's any chance that they tick the boxes or not. I think there are a lot of roles within projects that are misunderstood, and either there's an attempt to, if it's internal, I think sometimes an attempt to sort of shoehorn somebody into a role where they don't really fit the criteria for that position, but it's, well, they've been here for a long time, or they'd really like to do it, or they might leave if we don't give them opportunity, or we think they can kind of rise to the challenge, and those, I think, it's a toss of a coin whether those work out or not. And again, you're burning time and money and patience, usually, with all of your staff who you're delivering to, and everybody that's affected by the project. So I think trying to be honest about whether you are clear what that role requires, and asking your tech partner and asking anybody else that has experience of those positions, is to be very specific, and don't go for vague kind of generalist terms that mean that you'll get probably a lot more people applying, but then you trying to work out and clarify with them, again, what I said before, their expectation of what they're coming in to do versus your expectation of what they're supposed to be doing, and that not being something that comes to a head once they've started, which is is too late. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, in that space in our sector, I think, as a general theme with roles.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to, we've got loads of questions coming in for you, which is great. So thank you for putting those in, everybody. Please feel free to put some more in. So moving on to think about, looking at strategy, we know there's a number of factors that come into play on this, but are there any key areas that you think are vital to be considered when you're thinking about projects? I'm going to, Helen, if I go to you first.
Yeah, so I strategy is really key for your CRM implementation. You know, it should be driving your CRM implementation. You know, a CRM system is an enabler. So it's important to have a strategy. You know, sometimes we're talking to clients and they don't have one, and that it can make it a bit more challenging actually when you're looking at things like business cases to support them when they're not clear on where you know, the strategic direction that their business is heading in. And you know, a strategy, it can just be a page. It doesn't have to be you know, reams and reams of paper anymore. You know, a page is more than sufficient. And I think a few years ago the trend was for it to be a 5-year strategy, and I think because there's so much change that we're being presented with all the time. If you think about all the change that we've all experienced as individuals and organizations in the last 3 years, that a 5-year strategy isn't necessarily viable anymore, and people are now looking at, organizations are now looking at 1 to 3 years max. So I think that's obviously a trend we're seeing there. You know, and is your strategy fit for purpose? Is it, when you know, does it withstand scrutiny when you read it, and is it viable for your staff resources? Is it achievable? And I think when we're thinking of external factors of what's taking place, as well as all the items we talked about there, you know, cost of living, COVID, and all those areas that we're having to factor in. Another area is charity mergers. We've seen 2 sight loss charities announce that they're merging in the past week. So there's a lot going on that we need to take into account when we're considering our strategies.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, mine's quite a specific area, I think, but it's kind of connected into, I suppose, the success of anything that fits under those strategies is business process, which is probably the dullest subject for a lot of people that just want to get on and do projects. But actually, I think we've seen that we've never really seen it go away as an area where it is kind of underrepresented, I suppose, in a lot of organizations, or sort of undervalued, where, you know, a lot of our projects are asking questions about where do you record your processes, how do you record them, how do you bring new people into your organization, how do you keep things consistent? And usually the reason that we're brought in the first place is that they don't have any of those things written down or in place, and that's kind of where they've come to as a result of it. But I think really is you've got to tie in that thread to your project, to your strategy, that you are you have to be able to tell people how you expect them to work, and how consistently, you know, you need that to be done to get all the benefits that you're aiming for. One of the first jobs that I took on in the charity space, I took on a role where I took over a department, and there was nothing written down. You were sort of unpicking everything, you know, day by day, discovering why all the things that took so long. And it was impossible then to bring in new people because everybody just kind of found their own way. So the need to kind of grasp that nettle and take it on, and you don't need to do things at a ridiculously granular level across the board. There are ways of doing things with a minimal amount of time to understand where the biggest gaps are and where the greatest benefits can come from. But I think for me, that's got to underpin the work that you're trying to do, because otherwise, especially again, coming back to the being remote element, if there is no clarity, if you don't have the documentation or the videos or the induction process or whatever it might be that makes it clear how you expect people to do their role, then again, once that meeting ends and people are left to try and do things in their own way, you're providing a situation where that's likely to start kind of going off in its own direction, and you won't find that out until quite a way down the line, and then you've got to spend time unpicking it and kind of realigning it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. So finally, before we could bring in some of the other questions that have come in, any take-home advice or key point or points that you think some organizations should consider for this year when moving on into this year? I'm going to come to Helen first.
Yes, I think I would like the key takeaway to be for clients to consider resourcing, staff resourcing on projects. That is a constant theme for me at the moment. That you can never clients really do underestimate how much time they need to devote to these projects and the different areas you need to cover. You've got, for example, you've got, data migration, training, communication, making decisions on things like communication preferences. And there's all these different, and that's just, a start of a 10. There's just so many different areas, so many different things to do, and things can take longer than expected. And it's just really important to devote as much resource as you can to the project. And you can dip in and out. People, you might bring in someone for a set period of time and say for 3 months, we need you to be working on this part of the project, and then they can go away again as such, or come in on an ad hoc basis. So it doesn't have to be, permanent forever, but for the duration of the project, but you need people in for certain lengths of time to deliver certain tasks. So it's about having that flexibility. And also, it's a good opportunity as well. I appreciate staff resourcing can be a headache at times, and none of us have people sitting around doing nothing, but it's a good way to develop staff as well, bring in new ideas and develop them. And bearing in mind we're talking about staff retention, the more you develop people, the more likely they are to stay and feel wanted.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Chris, your thoughts?
I'm very much connected to people as well. I think digital skills are something that we I think are becoming more aware of as a sort of a discussion and a strand of strand of projects, but also the kind of the day-to-day, the BAU of our world, where we're speaking to a lot of clients who are finding that they're making assumptions, I suppose, about people that are coming into their organizations that are younger, and assuming that they have the understanding and the appreciation of data security, of the use of Office tools and various other things, Microsoft Office tools, thinking about how you would best be served by kind of assessing those skills early on, and getting people onto courses, or being able to provide them with resources that will enable them to kind of better use those tools. I think it's going to be an ongoing consideration. I don't think it's as easy as just saying, oh, okay, yeah, you grew up through technology, therefore you will be great at using it, and that can mean the difference between people being asked to do various data tasks and using Excel in the most manual, painfully slow way possible, or doing something in 20 minutes, and you not realizing that until they've been doing it for weeks on end, but also just being able to make the best of what technology you do have and gain new ideas and new insights from people. So I think trying to consider the skill sets you have just across the board, and trying to keep more of a I suppose a track of how you are developing your staff, because that will then help when you are looking for particular skills within projects to be able to hopefully identify where you've got some real potential. I mean, the ideal is that you would keep your staff interested and brought into what you do by different opportunities you give them. So those projects that come about and thinking this might be a step up for you, but we know that you've got a baseline of knowledge and skill that you can lend to this, and it will be a great development for you, and it will great development for us. And we've seen that in a number of projects where people have really stepped up and kind of blossomed and discovered things about themselves that they didn't realize they would enjoy doing, and excelled in areas where otherwise they might not have considered themselves for that particular opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, and interesting. There's a client I'm working with at the moment, and they didn't have the skills internally for the roles they needed on the project, and equally didn't have the resource to go out and hire in new people or bring in external consultants or things like that. And what they've actually done is they've identified a few key people, and they've sent them on the relevant training courses around project management, change management, data management, all that kind of thing. And as exactly to your point, those people now have an extra level of engagement with the organization. It's an extra skill for them, and I really think it's fantastic that the approach that they've taken to it. I think it's really quite refreshing. So coming on to the questions, so let me see. Right, Chris, first one for you. So cybersecurity is being mentioned more and more by our SMT. Is this an emerging trend or something to be increasingly aware of?
Yeah, a bit of both, I guess, really. I mean, I think it's certainly always been in the background in a lot of projects. I think and technology as a whole. I think with working remotely, the challenges change with, you know, how well your IT setup gives you confidence on security, and that's from all sorts of, you know, kind of attacks and but also, you know, loss of data or data sharing that's, you know, not being done correctly and securely. So it's certainly something that is becoming, I think, better known and better understood, and there are undoubtedly it's that, again, that shift from being, I think, office based and largely feeling like you know what people are doing because, you know, all of the kit that they're using is largely in the building, and, you know, your IT department can make sure it's got all the right virus checkers and you know, security settings to make sure people don't, you know, access or download things that they shouldn't do. But working from home and people using their own devices, or, you know, doing things which you don't have the same level of visibility and control over, you can get that excuse me, you can get that and you can get that assessed accurately. There are lots of different ways of doing that, but it's an area, it's a bit like with GDPR when that came about, with, you know, the security around how data was being stored and why. I think this is almost going to become sort of the new GDPR in a way with cybersecurity, because the risks, again, like with GDPR, the reputation, the dangers of things happening and then that appearing in the press and that being associated with you for many, many years, it is a risk that's not worth taking. So yeah, it's absolutely it's going to be a focus, I'm sure, for a lot of organisations going through this year and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, a question. This is definitely a question for you, Helen, on resourcing. I have an idea what your answer will be. So, on resourcing, can someone do a project management role as well as their day job? Helen, your thoughts?
In essence, no. No, I honestly, I don't think that's achievable. You know, because you need the project manager. The role of the project manager is to drive the project forward, and that is a full-time job, because you're trying to maintain the timeline. You're trying to push the partner on, push the SMEs on, or, you know, push all the internal stakeholders on to deliver. So it's a constant. It requires, you know, all that constant energy and attention to keep the project moving, and to manage all different streams of work. And I think just having a, you know, another part of your day job to do your business as usual job, it's not sustainable. It's just, you know, something, I think you risk burnout. You risk the person not being able to do either aspects of their role successfully. So I'm going with no.
Yeah, I thought that would be your answer, but I thought, you know, just check just in case. So another question coming in. So with the cost of living crisis, you know, impact, you know, of other factors, have you seen a delay in project starting, or I suppose more interestingly as well, a reduction in scope on any projects? I don't know if Helen or Chris, if either of you particularly, I can pick on one of you, but either of you in particular want to come in on that.
I'm happy to have a go at answering it. I would say as a called out kind of direct impact on scope, I don't think it's something that I think we're commonly kind of seeing at the moment. I'm not saying that might not change in you know, later down the year, but I think certainly in terms of clients probably trying to be a little bit more cautious about what their kind of first phase of delivery will be, and trying to keep people's expectations you know, a little bit more kind of locked down, and not trying to sort of promise everybody you know, everything that they could possibly want in kind of one fell swoop. So there's definitely an element there. I think what's been positive that we've seen through recent projects where we've talked about clients who have gone to their board of trustees or whoever it might be to ask for funding for a project, is that the majority of the time, I think most of those budgets are agreed to, you know, and they are often agreed to because what's the alternative is usually, well, we just have to stick with the thing that we've got that isn't efficient, that's costing us money, or a provider that's not really working in our best interests. And so there's little alternative, and there are huge benefits. but I do think that I suppose the element of cost of living is going to become more of a thing if people's expectations around you're getting a salary increase and you being therefore more comfortable, stable in your role. If that doesn't happen, and again, LinkedIn is calling all the time, offering you opportunities to make potentially more money, or have a different work in a different sector, or just take on a different challenge. It's going to be a balance that you're going to have to strike and keep an eye on the well-being and the I suppose the health of your project as a whole, really going forwards.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, it's a great question, Kevin. I want to make sure we get this in. Any tips on how to break skills bottlenecks, where the organisation has invested in, allowed one or two people to be the holder of all knowledge? Who wants to go first on that one? Because I know we could probably talk about that all day long.
Yeah, I'll jump in there,
Yeah.
Joyce. This one strikes close to home, actually.
Yeah.
So I think in the first instance, I think the risk has to be pointed out. There needs to be an honest conversation with the relevant people, whoever that may be, if it's sponsor, or if it's outside of, perhaps it's outside of a project at this stage, just about the risks that you're experiencing there. We've been talking all morning, we've been talking about staff retention and staff churn. What if those people leave? Or what if they, go sick, or whatever, things happen to people. And there is such a huge risk there. So I think there needs to be an honest conversation about that, and understand how it's happened. Why is that being encouraged? Is it because it's felt that they are the best people to do this and no one else can possibly take that on, for example? So there just needs to be that honest conversation, and it's important to share knowledge, document it. Chris was saying there, document processes, do that, share knowledge, get people to go on courses, as you were saying, Joyce, to share all that. It's far better for an organisation to have several people doing these things, rather than just narrow it down to one person. You'll be much more effective as an organisation, and I think you'll have happier teams as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, calling it out as a risk on the project immediately right at the start, I think that's definitely very important. Chris, I know you'll definitely have some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I suppose it's more of a reflection on what I've experienced in the sector, which is that a lot of these roles have organically grown over time. So, there are a lot of us that are committed to the sector and stay with our charities for a number of years. I did kind of 4-year stints at 2 of the organizations I work for, and knew people that were on 18, 20 plus years. And I think that's another element of to Alan's point about kind of almost understanding how somebody has become that bottleneck or that knowledge holder. And it's sometimes not an intentional thing. It's just that they have, been given the opportunity. It's, yeah, great, I'll take that on. And then for all of the same reasons that Helen's just touched on, that just means that they are that kind of that single point of knowledge and risk. So I think it's kind of trying to understand it. It's very much the change management element as well, of when you are working with those people, you need to be careful and cautious, and pragmatic about how you are trying to I suppose keep them engaged in their role, in their involvement with the organization, and make them not feel like you're trying to pull the rug from underneath them, or kind of do away with them in some form. But it is trying to also get them on board with the benefits of sharing that knowledge, of being able to have less of a pressure on themselves. And that's a tough thing for some people to kind of get to grips with, that it is actually beneficial for them. But I think it's fundamental, and it's something we do see almost in every project. There's usually there's one person at least that will be that person, and it's trying to then work with them, sometimes work around them. If being honest, it is sometimes trying to navigate around things that they want to do, which isn't, it's their best interest rather than the projects or the organizations, and it's trying to then kind of unpick that side of things as well. So not simple, but absolutely vital that it's addressed, as Helen said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've just one other great question coming in. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm just going to kind of put this one out there and try and answer quickly, and again, it's one of these, I don't think we have all the answers at all, but I think it's interesting. Early retirement is apparently having a huge impact on the workforce. People seem to retire if workplace pressure becomes too great. Can we encourage them back, and how? I don't know if either of you want to kind of comment on that. I think it's a really good observation.
I encourage them back is, I suppose, in what capacity? I think you're as a paid member of staff, or as a contracted person with a skill set. That's one option, I suppose. As a volunteer in some capacity is another, but you are then risking that volunteer, as any volunteer may decide that, that what you expect of them, or what they have thought of what they're going to do and the time they're going to give, it's not really lining up with expectation, and so I think it's a difficult one. I think it probably points almost to that previous question about bottlenecks and skills. I think I'd be worried for an organization that was so reliant on a person that if they retired, you would seriously worry about the wider implications for the organization. I think that's probably a pointer to not having things that are shared, not understood, not having a really kind of robust plan in place to say, well, if anybody it was ill for any prolonged period of time or left regardless of retirement, I think it's trying to be clear what you're hoping to gain from that. I haven't seen it happen that often, but I think when I have seen it happen, it's almost like a consultative. It's almost like having a trusted person brought back into the mix to kind of rubber stamp a decision, or sort of throw some throw some extra considerations into the mix. But it never feels like it's a particularly long-term solution, and it's actually as knowledge begins to expand and grow in the people that remain, that person and their role actually starts to become less relevant, and it doesn't make sense to kind of keep them involved, because as soon as they're less involved and less understanding of all the granular things that are happening on the day-to-day, the value that they're adding then starts to diminish. So yeah, it's a really interesting question though, but I don't know if Helen's got any thoughts on that.
Helen, if you have any thoughts, they need to be quite short.
No, I think Chris has covered it all, so in the interest of time, we'll leave it there.
Perfect. Some really, really great questions, and sorry that we haven't been able to get through all the questions, but we're very happy to follow up on on any of them afterwards. But really, it just leaves for me to say, a huge thank you to Chris and Helen for joining this morning. Some really, really great insights, and could talk all day long on lots and lots of these topics. But as I said earlier, there's some of these topics that we are having as separate standalone sessions throughout the year, so keep an eye out for those. But also thank you all for joining us this morning for the first webinar of the year, starting off 2023. So thank you everybody for taking the time, and hopefully we will see you again soon on another session. Thank you.